think you can hear me okay. Okay. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. Earlier in this week, I presented this talk with the MSA of UCT for the Islam Week. And I also sent the talk to the class. So those of you who want it was an hour-long presentation. So those of you who want the full talk, you can refer to it there. I wanted to, in this Naseehah, I just kind of add some additional comments and maybe just summarize again the perspective, which I think was fairly useful. So first of all, the talk is based on an article that's called Souls Assorted, an Islamic Theory of Spiritual Personality. And it is presented by Yaqeen Institute. Yaqeen is based in, I think they're based in Texas in the USA, headed by Imam Umar Sulaiman. And this article is written by Zuhair Abdul Rahman and Nazir Khan. And I think that personally, I find Yaqeen to be one of the leading organizations responding to contemporary Islamic issues. And I would strongly encourage all of you to subscribe to them, to read the articles, watch the videos, follow their works. I think it resonates well with us also living as a minority within South Africa, many similar issues. So I would encourage you to follow them, inshallah, Yaqeen Institute. I benefit enormously from reading the articles, and these are the ones I really enjoyed reading actually. That's the first thing. The second thing I wanted to mention, and I think I've spoken to this about to the other years before, and just mention in brief to the first year especially, but to all the years, is that generally when it comes to Islamic education, many students don't ever study formally beyond madrasa. Beyond madrasa, when I say maktab after madrasa, many students don't study beyond that. And they generally only attend madrasa education until about the age of 12, 13 years old. As soon as high school starts, and then Islamic education often slows down or even stops completely. And then that becomes the foundation. And we find that within theories of cognitive development, and the one I quoted last time was the theory of Piaget, is that the capacity for the individual to think actually, the capacity for a person to deal with abstract concepts such as justice and equality,
I was here in the
inequality,
car, always in the car. I was never went, gone.
theoretical constructs, metacognition, to think about why we think, epistemology, where do we get our truth from. These deeper thought thinking abilities only develop from 11, 12 years old. They start. I think they call this the formal operation stage. They only start from 11, 12 years old. And so what I find is that the irony is when a young person starts to be able to think abstractly, that is exactly the age where we stop Islamic education. And then the person is basically immersed in school education, university education, the kind of profession, and then Islamic education is left. And the real danger that possesses is that I like to call what you get at madrasa, your 6 pillars and your 6 pillars of Iman, and your 5 pillars of Arkan al-A'mal, your 5 pillars of Islam, Arkan al-Islam. That's just like starter pack Islam. Like you buy yourself and they give you a starter pack. Not much data, not much minutes. They give you a starter pack. That's like your starter pack Islam. And then you then you're confronted with a life of complexity, and then you're trying to all the time match it to your starter pack Islam, and then you always come up short because it's not sufficient. You haven't been given the tools and the references and the discussions to deal with issues. And then in a sense, then people start thinking of their own faith as inadequate or outdated or insufficient or whatever else people think. And often it's because it's lack of learning, lack of exposure. And so I think it's important for us to take the study of Islam seriously. And for example, Yaqeen Institute is one of those places where you can kind of read about contemporary issues, and there are many institutes online and in Cape Town for you to carry on with your learning, and Mizan being one of them. So I thought I'd start there and just highlight that because these discussions are important. I won't go through this whole presentation. I'll just speak about one or two key points which I found important to highlight. Allah says in the Quran, قل كل يعمل على شاكلته. كل, each person يعمل, they act على, upon شاكلته, upon their shakila. And the word shakal comes from the word shape. So shakila means the way they have been shaped, the way they have been formed. In other words, you could consider that to be their personality. Whether it's a mix of genetics and environmental factors, but they emerge with a personality. So everybody acts according to their natural tendencies, their personality. And Allah says, فَرَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَنْ هُوَ أَهْدَى سَبِيلًا. And your Lord is most knowledgeable about those who are most guided in their way and in their path. So in other words, Allah is acknowledging that we all will act according to our shakila, according to our genetic code, according to our upbringing, according to our culture, according to the way we have been, our temperament. We will act upon that. However, within your, or despite, or at a separate degree, separate discussion, separately from your personality, there's also guidance, and there's also the path that you take with your personality and with your upbringing. So the first thing is for us to separate between personality and character. That we have all sorts of temperaments. We have calm temperaments, and we have fiery temperaments, and we have easygoing temperaments, and we have stubborn temperaments, and we have dreamers, and we have warriors, and we have all sorts of hot and cold and all sorts of temperaments. No temperament is inherently superior to another temperament. It depends on what you do with your personality. And the Prophet ﷺ has become with universal guidance. إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have only been sent to refine your akhlaq. So when it comes to Islam, personality is considered to be really value neutral. It's like gender actually. It's value neutral, whether you're born male or female, or whether you're born with a laid back temperament or a fiery temperament. It's neutral towards Allah Ta'ala. What has value with Allah Ta'ala is akhlaq, is character. And I think one of the important points was that Islam is more concerned about prescribing and guiding your character as opposed to describing your personality. So and I think a lesson for me that stood out in this is that don't feel advantaged or disadvantaged because of your personality. Different personalities shine in different contexts, and different personalities don't shine in different contexts. It depends often on the context. Okay, so that's the first thing. I won't go through much of this detail. You can watch the talk for all the details. The second point, or I don't know what number I'm on now, but the other point I think is really important is that in the structure of divine guidance, Allah has prescribed certain things that are mandated upon everybody. These are the fara'id, these are the things which are compulsory upon everybody, and they're actually a very narrow set of actions. You'd know from your starter pack Islam that Arkanul Islam Khamsa, that the foundational actions of Islam are 5: to testify to faith, to establish prayer, to fast, pay zakah and to make hajj if you are able to. Those are the five foundational practices incumbent upon every believer. If we go one step further now, beyond now foundational compulsory practices, we have a myriad, we have a whole vast range of what we call the sunnah or the mustahab or the sunnah, mustahab, one of the two other synonyms for recommended actions. And when we read the recommended actions, there are a whole host of them. And you will find that your own personality, when you think about your own self, certain things you find easy. You find some people who fast Monday and Thursday and like it's nothing. For them, it's comfortable to fast and they're easygoing, and that's what they do. And for other people to fast ila qiyamah, like, when I fast, my life stands still. Like, so it depends what comes naturally to you. For some people, to come to a lesson and to listen to a talk they enjoy it. For others, it's a torture. For some people to open a book, it comes naturally to them. For others to learn, it's difficult for them. For some people to part with their wealth, they give it with an open heart because they love to help someone. And for some other people to part with their wealth is a difficult thing. It's actually it's a trial for them. For some people to control their anger is easy because they're calm and they're easygoing. For some, it's a hard work to control the anger. For some, it's for them to be brave and to be outspoken is easy, and for others, it's difficult. So, in other words, we all have different temperaments, different personalities, and you find that certain of the prophetic practices come easy to you, and certain are not as easy. And the beautiful thing about Islam is that Allah places a number of doors to Jannah, whether it's the door of fasting or the door of salah or the door of dhikr or the center door of paradise, which is looking after your parents, or even just controlling your anger is a door of paradise. So Allah places a number of gates to paradise. Why? Because there are a number of pathways that you can enter paradise. So that's one of the profound lessons from me from this article is that don't feel that you inadequate because you're not doing everything as you think you should be. Try to do good in your life with those things that come naturally to you. And there's a quote here from Imam Malik when they asked Imam Malik, why do you teach and not do other things? Imam Malik says that there's goodness in all things. But teaching and learning and teaching has come easy to me, and therefore I do this. And I don't view myself as superior to someone else or inferior to anybody else who's doing anything else. So it's a very profound lesson. Is do what you can. And sometimes when you read the hadith, there's sometimes small actions that enter people into paradise. Small actions enter you into paradise because it's done with the right heart. So do what you can with a good heart. And inshallah, Allah will accept that because the pathways to Allah are abundant. And then in this schema of personality, and again, it's only a schema, it's a theory, and there might be other perspectives as well, is that it's interesting because it looks at personality from two specific defined perspectives, and that is the one is the capacity to know, and number two, the capacity to act. The capacity to know, inna alladhina amanu, to know, because the highest level of knowledge is to know Allah Ta'ala, is to have iman. And wa amilu salihat, and then to act upon that. So in other words, those are the two kind of perspectives they're looking at personality from. And within the first one, and I'm going to just summarize this, you can read the full one again, is that there are people, and you can also reflect on your own personality, there are people whose, when they come to know something, their bias, their inclination is towards experiential knowledge. In other words, they are often attracted to, let's say, a mystical dimension of Islam or a conceptual view of things. The experience is not really about the details. It's about in Arabic they call it dhawq. Dhawq means to taste. Because to taste, in other words, to sit in a dhikr and to say La ilaha illallah and to feel the presence of Allah Ta'ala, to feel close to Allah Ta'ala is a knowledge. It's a type of knowing. It's knowing Allah Ta'ala, but from an experiential level. It's called basira. Basira means to have insight. It's not about like the cut and dried, halal, haram, facts and so on. It's an insight. It's a feeling that you have. It's something which is not kind of you can put to pen and paper. So this is some people's type of inclination. On the other plane, you have people who are more inclined to what we. So the first one's called ma'rifatul ahwal. The first one is called on the left, ma'rifatul ahwal, knowledge of experiences. The one on the right is called ilmul ahkam. Ilmul ahkam means people whose inclination is that they want to know the facts, they want to know the details, they want to know what is right and what is wrong. They want to know what is good for society, what's going to fix society, and what's harming society. In other words, it's a more practical knowledge. It's a more judgment-based knowledge, knowing what is right and what is wrong. I'm not saying these two are mutually exclusive because these two operate in a sense on different domains. All I'm saying is that people's inclination changes. Inclination moves between the two. And you might find that you yourself incline towards a certain thing. And you might even find that your wife or your brother or your parents incline to a different thing. And this often causes conflict because the perspective is different. The perspective is different. And I think it's useful to understand that often perspective is a consequence of personality. That people see what appeals to them, and people place importance on that which appeals to them. And from this perspective, you actually have movements emanating from them. And I'm going to maybe mention the movements in a non-judgmental way because they all have different perspectives. But for example, someone who is interested in ma'rifatul ahwal is much more likely to be attracted towards a Sufi group. Because and again, it's a very generalization. I'm not saying that the one group doesn't do the other things, and I'm not just understand it's a high level just indication. But ma'rifatul ahwal, they will be much more attracted to a Sufi shaykh, a Sufi group, because they want to experience truth. They want to experience truth. That's the type of knowledge that they appeals to them. Whereas ilmul ahkam is a different type of person. They're the person who wants to join a class on fiqh, join a class on aqidah. They want to learn what is right, what is wrong. They're often going to be people who are more attracted to social activism. They want to fix what this is wrong in society. We're going to fix this. The one in the Sufi group will say, before you can change the world, change yourself. Because they're more reflective, they're more internal looking. The other one will say, no, we have to do what we can to change our society. So that often causes a tension in perspective, because the one on the right might join like the Ikhwani group or something because they want the social reform, this practical change in society, and the other one will say, Allah is in charge, leave it up to Allah Ta'ala. So these are different degrees of emphasis. These are different inclinations. I'm not saying they are two exclusive things, but just understand that people's temperaments differ, and therefore you can appreciate that sometimes some people don't correspond towards your temperament. And interestingly enough, you'll often hear teachers at Mizan and all over the world quote Imam Ghazali. And I think Imam Ghazali has a special place because he's called Hujjatul Islam. He's called the proof of Islam. And one of the reasons is that Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala is a master on both Ma'rifatul Ahwal and Ilmul Ahkam. And therefore he's in a sense, he's unique in a sense. He is a master of experiential knowledge. And he is a master of Ilmul Ahkam. He's a faqih, he's a usuli, but he's also a man of spirituality. And Imam Ghazali rahimahullah in his works, he is uniquely able to bring those two together. And therefore, when he can even write about wudu and salah, he can write it from an ahkami point of view, and he can write it from an ahwal point of view. And that makes him unique and makes him such an important scholar for us to study and and to follow and to read about is that ability to bring the different worlds together, because there are weaknesses to each of these. So that there are strengths to ahwal and strengths to ahkam, and there are also weaknesses. And I'll speak about the weaknesses specifically. You can read the rest on your, you can listen to the rest on your own. But the weakness of someone who is focused on ma'rifatul ahwal is that because they are inclined towards an experience of truth, an experience of knowledge, they are often, not often, they face the danger of being engaged in blameworthy innovation. In other words, they could do something which we will say is like, according to the Sharia, according to the Ahkam, is impermissible or is frowned upon because they are seeking a spiritual high. For example, on an extreme case, you might have someone who maybe wants to combine some intoxication with dhikr, because sure, you get you might think, oh, you get the highest, the best dhikr if you have a few glasses or a few puffs. I mean, I joke about it, but there have been even groups who have condoned drinking from a spiritual sense. But anyway, so 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 a group like a tendency like that tends to open itself up because it's less concerned with ahkam. It's more concerned with experience and barakah and feelings and so on. Someone who is ma'rifatul ahwal, again, because they are less concerned in terms of their nature, personality about the rules, they can even start going into impermissible experiences, sexual addiction, drug abuse, intoxication, because they are on a high. They want to feel something. And then they often enter a cycle of shame between experiencing like a hedonistic high, between going to a nightclub and partying and drinking and then feeling guilty and then going to a dhikr and then getting in tune there and then going back because they want another high and going back, and they enter the cycle of shame. So this is the weakness of it. The remedy to that weakness is that person must be balanced with ahkam. The remedy to all of those weaknesses is that the person is to be balanced with ahkam, that there are limits and there is guidance from Allah Ta'ala, and we always stay within that guidance. Then the weakness of the person who is focused on ahkam, on what is right and what is wrong, and this is permissible and impermissible, is that person is often very rigid and very harsh because they are rule based. There's no discussion about experience and about context and about gradualism and about priorities. It's just about right and wrong, black and white. And life is not like that. So that's one of the weaknesses. Another weakness is that person tends to overestimate how much they know, because for them knowledge is confined to rules and black and white and yes and no. They discard, in a sense, experiences. So what they know is almost everything to them. So that's going to be a second potential weakness. And then this might breed a very, could breed sectarianism. In other words, my group follows the rules correctly and all the other groups does it incorrectly. Therefore, we are the only ones who are right. And eventually it could even lead to extremism. We have to fix something, doesn't matter what it takes, because we have to get everything in order. So this is the other side of the coin in terms of ahkam. And again, a balance for this group is to be more balanced by ma'rifatul ahwal, to have experiential spirituality, to understand people's journeys are different and people's contexts are different, to understand that understandings also diversify. So this is the first thing. The second thing, and let me just check my time, I'll have to end with this, inshallah, and is that the second perspective is to look at it from individuals' capacity to act. You compare like how much are they able to act. So some individuals on the left, they will incline towards doing good. They want to make a change, a positive change. We swing at action now, the relationship to action. They are enthusiastic, they are passionate, they are full of hope, they are doers, they want to do something. And individuals on the right hand side, they are more risk averse. They are more filled with fear. I don't want to displease Allah Ta'ala. I don't want to do what is wrong. I don't want to cross the boundary. In other words, their relationship is about risk and fear. So you might find that sometimes people with the different temperaments might clash because the one is a doer and wants to to make a change, and the other one is saying, what if this goes wrong? Is this really permissible? Have you checked if it's okay? And the other one is, what you worried about? The work is good. So they have this kind of tension between the two. So the one is kind of positive, and the one is kind of more fear-based. I mean, it's a beautiful year. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Indeed, the believers have been successful. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Those who are in their prayer, they are filled with awe. That's prayer is something which you do, it's positive. Allah says, number 3, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. Those that on false idle speech, they turn away. In other words, that's about restraint. That's about the right-hand side, restraining from something. The number 4 is about وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِزَكَاتِهِمْ فَاعِلُونَ. Those who purify themselves and give in the way of Allah Ta'ala. Something which they do. Number 4, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ لِفُرُوجِهِمْ حَافِظُونَ is something, a restraint. Those who guard and restrain their private parts, it's restraint. So this balance between doing good and the restraints. I'll end off here and I'll speak about the weakness of each one, and we'll end with that inshallah. Is that sometimes if you're focused on doing good and discard the restraint part, it can lead to someone who basically doesn't have the willpower and the drive to resist temptation. So they will give sadaqah and they'll make change, but at the same time is when something impermissible comes, they won't be able to resist it. Ibn Qayyim in the previous slide, he makes a quote. He says, how amazing is it that someone is able to fast during the day and pray at night and do such actions, but they're unable to even lower their gaze. Because the person is inclined towards doing good, but they don't have the capacity for restraint. A second potential weakness is a complacency that sets in. Because there isn't so much concern for refraining from vice, therefore they think, okay, I'll just do good and Allah will forgive me and all will be fine. The third thing I think also very important is that person is often very heavily dependent on the environment. In other words, if the environment, it's almost like they derive value from the environment, because when they do good, they see good and they feel reinforced. But when something doesn't go their way, they almost get despondent. So you have people who have like the Eno effect. They have all the motivation and enthusiasm and they want to do good, and then something doesn't work out, and then suddenly there's no drive anymore because there's external validation. And there's an ayah about that at the bottom there. And finally, the weakness of someone who is more restraint focused is that if fear dominates and restraint dominates, they often transfer that onto their spouse or onto their children. Don't do this, and this is haram, and don't do this, and don't do this. Unfortunately, many young Muslims have experienced this type of education where it's fear-based, and it can even be linked to violence, which is like a strange thing. Is that how do you become violent if you're fear-based? I mean, the one you should fear is Allah Ta'ala. But anyway, and people like this often then become adversarial to the Muslim community. Why? Because they are constantly pointing out everyone else's lack of restraint. They're constantly pointing out everyone else's lack of keeping within the boundaries. In other words, this person is doing wrong, this group is doing wrong, this Maulana said something wrong. It's a constant rebuke of people. Almost like it becomes a habit after a while, and this becomes an issue. And on a very personal level, is someone is restraint focused, over-focused, it's over-focused. Their own transgressions are very heavy upon them. And they can even become paralyzed with shame and with self-loathing, depression as well. Because they always feel inadequate, because they're so focused on how could I transgress that boundary. And then eventually it could become, they can forget the rahmah of Allah Ta'ala, and they can even start developing negative thoughts. So again, people have natural inclinations, tendencies, focus points between these two. The middle way is always the best way, and that's why you always kind of pull yourself towards the middle, because the believer is always between these two poles of hope and fear. And so I think a useful, and I'll end this inshallah, a useful, and I would encourage you to read the article. I would encourage you to watch the talk as well, because at the end of it, we plot all the personalities, and you can even do at the end, you can do a personality test to see which test you are and your families are. But what is useful for you is that self-reflection. Because once you are able to self-reflect and say that I have this tendency, I have this personality, but my spouse, my neighbor, my child has a different personality, you are able then to transcend the differences. You're able to become more objective. But as long as you remain subjective to your own personal inclinations, you then kind of, in a sense, you are limited in your ability to interact and build relationships with other people and transcend those differences. So, and I think our community, not our community, the world, I think the world is increasingly losing its ability to transcend its own perspective and trying to impose personal perspectives onto everybody else. I think it has a lot to do with obviously social media, because now you can kind of voice your nafs much stronger behind the keyboard in your phone than you would in person. So it's like an outlet for that nafs to come out. And I think that this has to be countered by education, maturity of thought, the ability to be objective, the ability to have a broad perspective, the ability to appreciate differences of opinion. And our community needs more of this. We can see every time there's a debacle that comes up, suddenly there's outrage from everybody, both sides. And there's a lack of maturity about how to deal with things in a calm, objective manner, and a manner which reconciles differences. And I think understanding personalities it helps in doing something. And also for me, it helps like me on a personal level to understand that someone else has different personality and different inclination, and that's perhaps why they're acting that way. And even though I may not agree with their actions or with their personal temperament, that is between them and Allah Ta'ala. It gives context to people's decisions and perspectives. So it's something I'll speak about more, inshallah, is ikhtilaf and how we deal with ikhtilaf. I think it's an important discussion, especially for our students. If the one thing that we asked as teachers from our students is that your education at Mizan is something which is a positive asset to the community. It is not a weapon that you weaponize and you go and you destroy communities with it, and you destroy families with it. It is something which you are able to take, and it brings value to yourself and to your family and to your community, that you're able to navigate differences and you're able to become a builder and a constructive member of society. And I think that's what we ask you. And we ask you that in the name of Islam. We ask you that with the teachings of the Quran, and we ask you that most pointedly with the personality of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because that's what we believe his personality was. If you read his personality in a broad fashion, so be that inshallah. Transcend your own temperaments, transcend your own perspectives, to create understanding of other people's positions, and therefore become those mature members, leaders, followers in society, inshallah. May Allah bless you and your families. May Allah bring harmony to all your relationships. If there's any difficulty in any of your relationships, may Allah bring harmony and ease and reconciliation to your heart and the hearts of others, inshallah ta'ala. May Allah unite our hearts once again as a ummah. May Allah unite our hearts for His sake, that we are all His slaves united before Him, serving Him. May Allah unite our hearts in the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And may Allah unite our hearts despite the differences in perspectives we might have, because we are all people of La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. we will carry on next week, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'll stay with the second years, inshallah. The first years, you'll carry with Mawlana Zakaria, inshallah.